IVM.
Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Mind the Gender Gap, a podcast in which we look at data, evidence, and stories to explore essential questions about women and work in India. Mind the Gender Gap is a collaboration between iWage and India Spend, and I'm your host, Sunaina Kumar. In our last episode, we spoke to women entrepreneurs in remote corners of the country who run micro or small enterprises. We looked at the barriers they face and we looked for solutions. In this episode, we will again be looking at women and entrepreneurship, but this time we will look at women from cities in India, women who run bigger enterprises and who create jobs. India was amongst the lowest ranked countries in the world in an index on women entrepreneurs. It was ranked 57th among 65 countries. According to one statistic, less than 6% of all startups in India were founded solely by women. A majority of startups by women are micro enterprises or are self financed. I'm going to take a bit of a detour here to share some data. If we look at entrepreneurship, there are two broad categories: necessity driven enterprises, those that do not hire workers, businesses created out of economic necessity by people who cannot find employment, and growth oriented enterprises, businesses that are started out of choice, that hire workers and are growth oriented. And if we look at data from India, most women run necessity driven enterprises. That's nearly 22% of them. And only 5% of women run growth oriented enterprises. Women entrepreneurs are not being equipped to reach their potential in the country. And that potential is huge. If we can accelerate female entrepreneurship in India, it could potentially create 150 to 170 million jobs by 2030 and transform the Indian economy. So, how do we grow this pie? To explore this, we have three wonderful guests today. Monisha Advani is the co-founder of Emmay Entertainment, which produces films and shows and is one of the most successful production companies in the entertainment sector. Before she turned to the entertainment industry, she was the founder of an HR consultancy, which was acquired by the world's largest HR services company. Hemalatha Annamalai is a serial entrepreneur, founder, and former CEO of Ampere Vehicles, a company that had led the revolution in electric vehicles in India. Hemalatha is an engineer and an MBA by training who took the leap into entrepreneurship. We will also be chatting with Nupur Garg, who is the founder of WinPE, a not-for-profit initiative to enhance gender diversity in investment and entrepreneurship. She is a leading investor in private equity and mentors women entrepreneurs across platforms. Our first speaker today is Monisha. She's a leader in the entertainment industry where women hold only 10% of writing and directing positions, according to a recent study. She is a serial entrepreneur who had her first business idea when she was 7 years old. Thanks for joining us, Monisha.
Pleased to be here.
So, the first question that I want to ask you is about being a first generation entrepreneur. Both your parents have been professionals. What are the challenges that you have faced, and how difficult is it to be a woman entrepreneur in an industry which is difficult to break into for women?
So I came from, I'm a product of the 1970s, and then automatically that was a time where in middle class India, the diet at breakfast, lunch, and dinner was usually get a green card and get a job at IBM or Citibank. It's ironic, isn't it? Because when you look at the kind of Fortune 500 companies that are led by Indians now, maybe that was somewhere the seeding of the brain drain. I resisted that thought, and I think I always was a bit of a genetic outlier, and I chose to be an entrepreneur from an early age. It was, I think the best part about it was that, when you don't know that it's going to be difficult, you just give it your best. So I've always considered myself lucky to have leapt when I did into the world of entrepreneurship, because I never knew the risks associated with it, partly because it was never part of the discussion at home, since both my parents weren't in business. That sometimes is the best way to learn to swim as well, right? When you don't know that there isn't a bottom at the deep end. And I think that's what helped me out. again, similarly, when it comes to the gender difference, I think I was a bit blessed and fortunate to have a very strong mother who nurtured me by saying that, well, for practice, you have two brothers and learn how to beat them, and it'll help you when you get ahead in life. And very honestly, I've always tried to hardwire myself as somebody who is a person, a human being first. And I'm reminded often of the fact that, hey, as recently as this morning at my gym, that women aren't supposed to have upper body strength. And I asked my trainer why. And I think the naivety with which sometimes women entrepreneurs ask those questions and challenge them, I think gets them ahead. So if you were to ask me, I think it is absolute naivety, the freshness of thought that helps you make that breakthrough. The biases are there. You become more and more tuned to it as the generations go, because I didn't have the same outlook that I did when I was 19, when I started my first business. If you ask me today at 52, I feel the pressure sometimes, the gender difference. It can be something as simple as if I walk into my own office, the guards will stand up if my brother is walking in with me, but not looking for reverence. But it's in the small things that you realize there is a difference, and that will always be there, unfortunately.
I totally agree with that. The small unconscious biases that we encounter. But I also really like the perspective you shared about sometimes jumping right in and then figuring it out. So, in one of your interviews, I heard you talk about networking. And we know that networks go a long way towards ensuring that entrepreneurs find support. It increases their confidence. It also increases their chance of being successful. And women find it harder to access networks than male entrepreneurs. What has your experience been in creating and nurturing networks, and what have you gained from it?
So again, I belong to a generation where if you walked into a party, usually you'll have the women on one side and the men on one side. And the conversation was pretty much dictated by that. The women would be talking about what's being served in this party versus what's been served in a previous party. And the men are supposed to be the ones who are talking shop. I think it helps the fact that sometimes it helps when you're single, you just don't know which side to go to. So I just would land up very automatically having a chat on both sides. And that I think somewhere helped me make the network connection. If I was to go more granularly, I always consider that sometimes the most taken for granted network is the one which is a network of enablers. So my tip to entrepreneurs starting out or aspiring entrepreneurs would be that don't undervalue the kind of position and network that secretaries, executive assistants can be to a business, because they sometimes are the keepers of the mind share of decision makers. And by valuing them, you actually end up having access. I think at the end of the day also, Sunaina, you just need to be yourself. I think people really endear themselves to authenticity. And I think if you're well informed or if you're curious, you ask the right questions, people are more likely to gravitate towards you and be a good listener. I think everybody has a story to tell. And if you listen to them, it just broadens your network automatically.
So, an underlying theme for this episode, Monisha, is the idea of looking at women as job creators. As an entrepreneur and someone who generates employment, I read that over 60% of the workforce in your production house is female. How do you think businesses can think more effectively of creating jobs, and especially jobs for women?
It's a very good question you asked, Sunaina. I think there is a slight bias in saying that when you're a woman entrepreneur, you will create more opportunities for women. Whereas for me, it's always been important to somewhere ignite awareness in my male colleagues, because I think the inclusivity that you're able to achieve, or rather than tokenism, comes from making sure that both genders are accepting and involved and invested in looking for the best person for the job rather than the best man or best woman. And I think setting up meritocracy and propagating it it's easier said than done. We all are hardwired with biases that a certain job can be only done by a man or a certain job can only be done by a woman. If you've got a salesy job, you'll typically say, hey, get somebody who's really pretty. You've not said the gender, but you've implied what you needed to with that. I think I've seen this progressively, something that one has to very consciously deconstruct. And I've always maintained that my current business is one of the rare, it's an outlier in what we do, primarily because of the fact that we hire and encourage and enable more women than most of our counterparts. And a lot of that credit, it would be easy to say that 3 partners out of which 2 are women, which is why it gets done. I think a lot of that credit goes to Nikhil, who's our 3rd partner. And if we were to take a test, I think he would turn out to be the biggest feminist, actually.
That is good to hear. So, the entertainment industry is built around the gig economy. Almost 90% of jobs are gig based in nature. You yourself work with a lot of gig workers. How do you think the gig economy, which offers women more flexibility, can be made more effective and work for women?
It's very interesting that you ask this question again, because if you look at the West in the last 2 decades, they have consciously tried to move towards a more gig/project oriented employment. It's the very reason why 5-day weeks were created, now transitioning towards 4-day week. The pandemic of the last 2 years has really been an accelerant for that ideology, because people themselves, irrespective of gender, have realized that they want that work-life balance. Women were always somewhere marginalized in being hired for what would be considered tenured assignments or employment, primarily because of the fact that it was assumed they would have to plug in, plug out for other responsibilities such as pregnancy, rearing a family, etc. I think the fact that the world is moving more towards this kind of engagement in professional environments is very, very encouraging, because it enables women without them having to be apologetic about the fact that they're going to require this kind of format. I think where the entertainment industry is concerned, the word gig actually comes from the entertainment industry. And it's been a proponent of it largely for economic reasons, but it has very organically created a culture and a very normal work environment where you actually can achieve this kind of balance and engagement.
It has been an absolute pleasure to chat with you, Monisha. Thank you for joining us on Mind the Gender Gap.
Thank you so much, Sunaina, and more power to you and the team. I'm a big, big fan of India Spence. Keep doing what you guys are.
Thank you. Hemalatha is joining us from Coimbatore, and Tamil Nadu is interestingly the state with the most women-owned enterprises in the country. Welcome to the show, Hemalatha, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sunaina. It's a pleasure to be part of this. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to have you. Let's dive right in with the first question that I want to ask you, which is slightly broad-based, so bear with me. Entrepreneurship is hard, and it's even more so for women. As a first-generation entrepreneur, your father has been a professor, your mother has been a teacher. What are the challenges that you have faced? How were they compounded by your being a woman? And what did you learn from them?
Yeah, thank you, Sunaina. I think it's a very good starting question, I would say. The challenges are the same for both men and women. But women have to go an extra mile, particularly in the auto industry where it is 99% male dominated. So we were an early mover and the challenges were plenty. So I would broadly classify them as, first of all, the infrastructure, because the supply chain ecosystem was barely existing. And almost all components except the tire, tube, mirror, and shock absorbers had to be imported. And so that means you had less control over the supply chain. And secondly, government policies did not evolve then. Hence, it was very tough to make long-term plans for the business itself. And thirdly, talent was almost non-existing, which means we had to train people. We have to upskill them from other industries to understand how electric scooters were made. And lastly, of course, investment and investors. Since the industry was just starting then and barely anyone had any success, there was not the precedent, you see. So it was extremely challenging to raise debt or venture fund, right? So these are the broad challenges. And one of the things that we mitigated this risk, particularly on the infrastructure, was we actually was one of the first companies to be able to create our own in-house electronics, R&D electronics, which means we made our own chargers and converters. To that extent, I would say that we were the first company that dared to think very differently at that point of time. And we were a truly Make in India company at that point of time. Okay, so this is the first part in terms of the challenges. For the one personal experience I could share was, I still remember one time a supplier came to our factory and then straight looked at my eyes and then asked me, "Where is sir? I want to talk to him." So I told him, "I am the sir, please come." right? So once you kind of start to engage with them and they clearly know that you are the decision maker, you are clear, you're decisive, and you know the subject matter, then it becomes very easy for you to kind of correspond, right? One key learning here, though, is that you kind of position yourself right at the beginning that you are the leader and you are the key person to be able to make things happen. You see, not only for internal but also for the external world. I think once you position yourself, I think that is how you can compound the issue of being a women, particularly in the auto industry. And also, the other learning for me is that it's always the mindset, right? Because I dreamt a big dream, right? And I never thought of us as a small company at all at any point of time, Sunaina. You see, and that's the power of the thought because you manifest what you think, right? So I think that really helped us because we always thought of us as a big brand, though a small entry, big brand coming into doing some big stuff. So I think that's the kind of complete answer to your question, Sunaina. I hope I answered them.
Yes, you did. Actually, lots of fascinating things that you said. The one thing about where is Sir, I think we working women, whenever we find ourselves in places where we're not expected to be, it's a question that we always hear. Also, the point that you made about positioning yourself as a leader right at the beginning, I think that is something to really hold on to. My next question is something that I know in our chat that we had is something that you've been thinking about, which is the fact that women have to battle inherent biases, and a lot of that is to do with their own internal conditioning, which holds them back from advancing in work or in businesses, whether that is domestic obligations or even bridging their own confidence gap. Have you experienced this, and what advice would you have for women entrepreneurs to battle this?
Yeah, actually, very good question. You see, from my experience, it's all about the choices that we make, right? And then, so if you think through and make careful choices that will benefit all, meaning all stakeholders, right? Your family, your children, your spouse, your career, right, etc., then absolutely you can handle any biases. You can be neutral to situations, and you can also avoid being judgmental, right? And you can advance in your goals. I know this is not easy. It comes by practice. In my own case, what I did was I put the purpose before the goals, right? And one of the key purpose for us was how do we make affordable mobility for people in rural markets, which means how can we give a transport alternative that's cheaper than the bus fare, right? And the goal was very lofty, very, very big goal, big ambition, right? So the purpose was the one that actually drove me, us, family, my team, everyone, right? But then to be able to drive this purpose, you have to get the buy-ins of people, right? And that's an investment that you have to make, which means you have to explain to people, make them understand why it is important, that why you strongly believe that it's possible to get such a goal achieved, right? So this is something that I have learned over the years, that once you're able to understand it and you're able to articulate well, your choices very well, then that's a first step in terms of, looking at overall in terms of the biases and how do you kind of navigate through, right? And the second part of your question in terms of internal conditioning, right? It's very, very simple, right? Because you see, whether you like it or not, women are the anchors of the home, whether you like it or not. And it's like that for ages. And I don't think we can be a super mom, super mother, super daughter-in-law. We can't do that. I mean, you have to battle many things, right? So one thing that I did very early on was that it is actually coming from my upbringing is that I always wake up early, right? And then this habit has really helped me a lot because early to bed and early to rise really helped me to get more time, actually. You'll be surprised. Because if you look at it, if systematically you kind of get conditioning to get up early, you get more time for yourself. Okay. And if you see many successful people, if you study them, they're all early risers, right? That was one thing. And I also resorted to yoga and meditation very early on, which has helped me quite significantly, I would say, right? And what I also learned and realized over the years, Sunaina, is that at the end of the day, the key to all this is that all to any internal conditioning, be it getting up on time or doing your practices or involving in any sport, is that it's a discipline and also consistency. Both are required, right? The consistency is what will help you to actually climb up step by step, which you can see yourself. And one thing is that for me, even if I miss because a session because of my hectic travel and all that, I would come back on my schedule very, very quickly, right? So this is what I feel that we have to be at it quite systematically, because it's all about choices once more. And then how you prioritize your choices, because that prioritization is what makes a difference, because you don't have to fight the small shit here. You actually focus on the big things where you can really make a difference. I think that is what, as a leader, you have to do. And real operational matters and all that, I don't think you should go put your head into it and leave it to the operational people, right? You look at the strategies, the visioning, the bigger things of the business rather than the smaller stuff.
I have a very quick follow up on this. You talked about expectations to be super mom, super wife, super everything at home.
Yeah.
How does one manage those expectations from self?
I mean, very clearly, I think one is, you should take more help. For example, in managing your domestic chores, you should definitely get more help, right? I have seen many people sometimes, even particularly from South perspectives, right? They will be very scared even to have a domestic helper because the mother-in-law would not like it, right? So I think you have to voice out and you should take more help at all times. Okay. And for me, my children were taken care of at certain times where I was not available for them. My husband will come really to support the system and all that. And so it's about communication and explicitly telling out, voicing out and taking help. And I don't think you should feel shy to take help and ask for help, right? Because the more help you get, the better you'll be able to, solve the problem. I even tell my children, I don't have two children. I have 158 children at my office. I used to tell them, right? And I used to make them understand, right, that we have a bigger family and we have to, the goal is big. When the goal is big, I think you have to take help, Sunaina, at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And since we are addressing biases, can we also talk about biases that crop up in interactions with stakeholders that women entrepreneurs often face, whether that is for access to credit or market or most interactions in the ecosystem? What has been your experience of this?
Actually, I mean, if you look at it, I'll share my personal experience. Okay, when we started in 2008, we were growing at 200%, right? In the first 3 years of inception. Okay, so we were kind of cocksure that we will kind of make it big, right? We were working very confidently. We were very bullish. But then suddenly came an act, the central government suddenly withdrew subsidy on electric scooters, right? Which means suddenly the customers who bought the scooter at if a scooter costed 35,000 rupees, they got a very good subsidy from the government of 5,000 rupees. So they had to pay only 30,000. It was very, very attractive, right? And when the subsidy was axed off completely, abruptly, our fixed costs remained the same, right? So our cash flows had become very, very, very tight. It was very hard to pay salaries on time. You could not even pay vendor payments on time, right? It was a very, very tricky situation for any entrepreneur, actually. And that's when we realized that the government had actually enhanced a scheme. It was called a CGT MSE scheme. It's a credit guarantee scheme, right? Where typically manufacturing companies are given that credit. It was 1 crore at that point of time, and the government changed the scheme to about 2 crores, right? It's actually a collateral-free scheme, which means you can actually, based on your inventory and collectibles, you will be able to get that credit, which means you only pay interest when you avail the credit, right? So we were actually very happy with the credit came, and I immediately marched up to the bank to see whether we'll be able to get the credit. And as usual, the manager looked at my face, plain blank, and said that, sorry, madam, you're not eligible because you're not profitable. Because we were a new entrant, the whole industry was new, electric vehicles was new, everything was kind of at the inception stage, right? And the manager was very clear that you're not profitable, so we're not going to help you at all, okay? So it took actually almost multiple trips to the bank up and down. I wouldn't want to give up because this is given by the government. I told them also we had a very clear business plan. We explained as to why we are not profitable, and with a very clear revenue model, we explained. And then actually after about maybe 12th or 14th trip to the bank, we were able to get a limit enhanced. But even then the bank was not willing to give us as a cash limit, but they gave us a limit as a letter of credit, which was also very helpful for us, right? So why I say this example is that, sometimes what happens is that, see, you got to articulate yourself. You have to explain your problems in a manner that you make the other party understand your problem, right? And see, if you kind of go to face value and just come back stating that, the manager said no and all that, you can't give up so fast here, right? And this is exactly what we did. We never gave up. We succeeded by actually making a very clear plan and articulated that well to the manager. So actually, this was on the cash. This was on the credit part, right? Where it's always tough for manufacturing companies, right? And then on other interactions, see, generally people judge women's capabilities based on our gender, not based on our potential, right? And this is a big problem that we all face at all times, right? I still remember when I went to do a fundraise with one of the venture capital funder, he looked at me straight, Emmay, and, kind of judged me, saying that, hey, what do you know about manufacturing? There are very, very big brands. There's a Hero, there's a TVS, there's a Bajaj. What do you know about manufacturing, you say? I know that he was, provoking me because obviously he was an investor. But then I very clearly said to him at that point of time, sir, the big companies are here not to lose. I'm here to win. Both are different in context, right? Fighting not to lose and fighting to win, fighting to make a brand where you're empowering people, where you're creating jobs, both are different completely in context, right? So when we explained that to the investor, I think he understood very well, and he obviously did not fund me, but he said that you will be successful, right? At least he gave me a blessing, right? And then other thing I also wanted to point out, Sunaina, here is that, see, if we as women, if we have to bring about change, particularly in manufacturing companies or large companies, we have to have many women at the board level. And that is not there. That is insignificant, actually, if you look at it, right? And because when women represent at the board level, many inequalities can be prevented, right? So that is also one of the things that I actually wanted to suggest, where we kind of systematically, sort out this one step at a time and made the board hear the women's issues overall.
Very relevant point. And I also like that I asked you the question about bridging the confidence gap. And through all the instances that you've been citing, you've actually been showing us practically how you have bridged that gap and demanded what you needed at that moment of time. I want to ask you next this question about job creation and women creating jobs for women. So at Ampere, you introduced women to the factory floor. You created jobs for women, and that too in the non-traditional sector.
Yeah.
What sort of interventions do you think we need that this becomes more of the norm and that enterprises can create jobs for women?
Yeah. So if you look at it, in Ampere at the point of time, we almost had 30% women in our workforce. Okay. It took almost 3 years for us to drive and execute that. One personal experience was my production supervisor refused to hire women. He said that, no, madam, women, it will be very difficult. Every month, three days, they will not come. They can't lift heavy things. I mean, all this are very stereotypical thinking, right? And it just went back and forth. And after about almost 3 to 6 months, we sidelined him and then we moved on and then we started to hire more women. Okay. So sometimes we have to be brave to be able to execute what you wanted, what you have conceived. That's number one. In terms of the interventions, I always wanted to tell that firstly, any such interventions when it comes to women has to be driven from top. It has to be top down. Okay. And the HR must be explained of the benefits of having a gender balanced company. And we should showcase role model companies that have benefited with having more women in their teams. That was the first thing. The second thing also is that, see, many companies have internal referral schemes, right? When they hire any employees, right? I think we should double the incentives if many women are being hired, because that actually will get the gender balance. Okay. And then I think I also believe that, the ambience for women in a factory environment or manufacturing environment has to be very safe and secure. I know of many companies where there's not a very good toilet for the women. There is not even a sanitary napkin bin for the women. I mean, these are all fundamental problems for women. Yeah, we have to take it up, right? So we ensured that when we started in 2008, I was telling, when we chatted earlier, that, the talent was non-existent in this industry, right? So we actually have to go to factory. We have to go to, places around our factory and then knock to people and see to come and join us, right? And many women, mother-in-laws, said that, no, my daughter-in-law cannot come, right? Then I said, I am there to help you, okay? Don't worry, please come. We are there to support you, like that. And when they saw the women manager, leader, they got a little bit convinced, right? So you have to make it happen in that sense, actually. And I think that, it is a continuous process, Sunaina. It's just not that you cannot do one time, right? You have to have stakeholders for this at a board level. You have to ensure that the company is 100% women, 100% male. You have to at least start with 10% first. If it's 30, if it's 90% male, at least 20% should be women. Like that, systematically we have to bring in women, and that's how this gap can be narrowed. And I think it is a huge responsibility on the management of the board of the companies to be able to make it systematically, because it is proven that when women are given the opportunity, they will succeed no matter what. Okay, it's proven. Okay, and I have seen it from my own experience.
That's absolute music to my ears. I'm afraid we're a little bit out of time. And the final question that I want to ask you is the question on technology, also because I know you are thinking of a venture in technology now. Mm-hmm. We know that technology has enabled many women to start their own businesses, particularly since the pandemic, whether that's home run or larger in scale. But we also know that not all women have access to technology in India. Mm-hmm. What is the role that technology can play in supporting women's entrepreneurship?
Okay. See, what I can just tell you that the 21st century is completely digital economy, right? Whether you like it or not, you have to move into digital. You have no choice. So digitalization are the new buzzwords. Okay. Technologies are providing a whole layer of support to enable growth. Okay, from education to selling platforms to payment processing, it's all layered. So you have to understand these layers, number one, right? And then secondly, you have to craft your business to understand these digital technologies. You have to leverage it, right? Which means you should bring in mentors who know this very well and then take the help to be able to, first of all, get into becoming a digital savvy company. Okay, that's the first one. And secondly, if you take the example also, Jaipur rugs, for example, right? Women cooperatives in Jaipur actually are making hand woven carpets, right? Which they can sell on an online platform portal to customers from North Africa to North America to Asia. So it's a very, very big opportunity because it just holds up a new way of thinking to sell, right? So thereby you have multiple channels to be able to market your products, right? In fact, the Harvard Business Review published a research that shows that access to technology is a key factor in in speeding up global gender equality. And they say that every aspect of the company has to be taught digitally completely, thereby you kind of really use this to your advantage, particularly startups, because you don't have a baggage. Startups, at the beginning stage, if they kind of implement these digital tools, I think they are far more, they can be successful.
Nupur is based out of Gurgaon, which is a hub for the new wave of startups in India. She is among the few women leaders in the venture capital space and sits on the board of several companies. Thanks, Nupur, for joining us.
Thanks, Sunaina. It's a pleasure being here.
So I want to begin by asking you about startups in India, a sector in which India has done exceptionally well in the last few years, but not when it comes to bridging the gender gap in the startups ecosystem, where women remain hugely underrepresented. Is that something that's related to the gender imbalance in the venture capital or the private equity industry in India, something that you've spoken about on public forums?
Sunaina, the gender gap in the startup ecosystem is incredibly high. If you look at data on funding to women-led businesses, between Jan 2018 and June 2020, startups led by women founder CEOs received only 1.43% of the total capital raised in India. The percentage went up, but it went up to 2.06% for the period April to December 21. And I'm pretty much sure it is buoyed by the exceptions. But even if we assume that this is the normal level, and there are people who are complementing the increase in the percentages and complementing the increase in the allocation to women-led businesses, the percentage is beyond dismal. And I believe strongly that the gender imbalance in the investing ecosystem is a major factor that influences this imbalance in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And this is corroborated by research, which has found that female investors are more likely to invest in management teams that include women, and investing firms with at least one female partner are 1.5 times more likely to invest in female-led businesses. Data is also suggesting a positive relationship between women as allocators of capital and women as recipients of capital. And, intuitively also this makes sense if you correlate this with unfortunate instance of investors asking, say, sexist questions while diligencing female entrepreneurs. And if I can take a step further to talk about how the funding cycle goes, generally, female founders receive a quarter of the funding sought, while male founders receive half on average. And even when female founders raise funding, they are less likely to raise a subsequent round. And for the companies with female founders and CEOs that do raise a subsequent round, 31% would have replaced the woman with a male counterpart. So the lack of women in the investing ecosystem does not only influence the ability of a woman-led business to raise funding, it cascades and continues even after funding has been secured, impacting the longevity of either the business or the woman in the lead role, or sometimes even both.
So I really like that you've made the case with a lot of data to corroborate. The data nerd in me absolutely loves this. What I want to ask you next is about gender lens investing, which is a growing phenomenon globally and in India. And it focuses on investing in businesses that are owned by women or are catering to women customers. Nupur, can you tell us a bit about your experience with gender lens investing, and how do you yourself look at women-led businesses? Is it with the same lens?
So I'm going to be a little controversial maybe on this one. So gender lens investing has been around in different forms for quite some time, from gender scorecards to gender toolkits to the current frameworks. There have been many efforts to direct funding or influence the flow of funds towards businesses that are owned by women or cater to women customers. And now the metrics have expanded to include women in leadership, women in workforce, and women in the supply chain. These efforts have largely been driven by the DFI so far in an effort to mobilize more capital towards these kinds of businesses. And that is where I believe the big challenges exist. It has been difficult, very difficult to mobilize non DFI capital. And there is a bit of this impact perception, which seems to signal that this cause is high impact but low return. So, quite similar to how we think of putting hiring quotas. As soon as you say, I will hire only a woman, immediately a perception is created that the woman is being hired for her gender and not her capabilities. So, it continues to be a large pending task to mainstream the gender conversation into PVC. And I think that is a big challenge with the concept of gender lens investing.
That is right. One of the questions that we are addressing throughout this episode with our speakers is to think of the aspect of women as job creators, and what will it take to shift the thinking of women as job creators rather than job seekers only. Are there any solutions that you can think of?
I believe the biggest driver for this change in culture and mindset will be having more women in leadership positions. And it is, not about having two successful entrepreneurs who've created unicorns, because that doesn't really create the critical mass that is needed. It does not create the momentum or the movement. We need women as founders, women as CEOs and CXOs, women on boards, women as decision makers. It is then that the shift will start to happen. And neither of this is easy given the historical context and the significant disparity that exists today. And a real commitment is required. But, within all of this, I believe organizations and investors really have the ability to influence a couple of things. So diversity on boards, diversity in leadership teams, diversity in founding and promoting teams. And those are the areas that WinPE is working on, working with firms in changing how they hire, how they support, how they promote, how they diligence, how they invest, what culture are they creating, and how they work with businesses that they invest in. So when they've invested in a business, can they put gender diversity on the agenda? Can they build a board, a leadership team with diversity? Can they think about women in the workforce? Can they think about working with women in the supply chain, etc.?
So, what you said about women in leadership positions, women on boards, and for women to be able to reach a critical mass, I think that's something that we all need to think about a lot more. One more aspect that I do want to cover with you is the fact that women also represent a huge opportunity, a growing base of consumers that businesses can tap into. Do you think there is a growing awareness of the fact that it makes good sense to invest in women?
Yes, there is increasing awareness on this. And because, you are the data nerd, I think I remember reading somewhere that women make up 75% of decision-making consumers across the world, right? So there is increasing awareness. And in fact, this is almost the most frequently cited reason by fund managers when I'm talking to them about building investing teams with gender balance. So most of them believe that it is critical for them to have women in the team if they have to evaluate a business that is selling to a female consumer. But I want to push beyond this and ask if maybe we are doing a disservice here by limiting a woman's investing acumen to businesses that sell to them. Maybe it's a gross generalization. Are we saying women are not, maybe they're not good enough to invest in infrastructure or manufacturing or real estate? And of course, why should we even suggest that men are not good at building, say, fashion and cosmetics businesses when some of the world's best brands have been built by men historically? Right? So I think it is a good starting point, especially when we think about how poor the gender balance is. But I would really like to move beyond this. Let's not create another stereotype and say we need to hire women because we have to sell to them.
That's absolutely fair. Nupur, my final question to you is a bit more personal. As a woman in an industry which is dominated by men, which is also where we began this conversation, what would you say it takes to surge ahead?
It takes many different things, Sunaina. And I think at different points of time, I respond to this question differently. But the common things that I always think that have worked for me, one is you really have to reach your workplace with your professional hat on. You have to leave your gender hat at home. And you cannot start personalizing everything in the context of your gender. Yes, gender plays a role. But as a professional, you do have the opportunity to just go ahead and work so efficiently as a professional that people around you stop thinking about the fact that you're a woman. And it's difficult, it's easier said than done. And there are a bunch of women who have openly said that we have to work 3 times more than our male counterparts. But honestly, I never focused on that. And I think if you look around us, hard work is the only mantra to success. Right? So you really have to put aside whatever you think is trying to pull you down. You have to let go of all the negatives and the challenges that are surrounding you and just focus on what your strengths are. Focus on what you can do well. And then just do such a damn good job of it that nobody can stop you.
Thank you to our listeners for tuning into this episode of Mind the Gender Gap. If you are interested to know more about the gig economy and its impact on women workers, then iWage has a very interesting report which we will share in the show notes. So do look it up. If you like this episode, please spread the word and share it with friends. The show is available on IVM Podcast Network and on all major podcast streaming platforms. We will be back soon with the next episode, and we hope to see you there.
Hello. It's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. Do you know that every time you recall a memory, you tweak it a little bit? Listen to Ashton talk to Dr. Nicole Byers, neuropsychologist and CEO of Rocky Mountain Neurosciences in Calgary, while they discuss this fascinating topic. On Cock and Bull, Cyrus, Punit, Nivedita, and myself can't stop gushing over the inauguration of India's first double-decker electric bus. I don't think there was that much gushing, but go ahead and listen to it. It was fun anyway. On Advertising is Dead is All Business, Varun talks to Bliss Club founder Minu Margaret about her journey of building a community-centric brand. On A Niche Thing, Anish talks to Sonika Bhasin, a sustainability enthusiast. The duo discuss waste management and effective ways of recycling, and duo they really are. Sonika is Anish's sister. And on A Sip of Finance, Priyanka explains 3 things one should consider before getting health insurance. Hey everybody, as you know, we've been beating the horse for merchandise, and you should go and get it now before we refresh our collections. And what's there right now won't be available forever, so go get it now. You can go to ivmpodcast.com, go click on the store link, and you'll be able to find the store, or go to beyondfollow.com/IVM, and you can go directly over there and pick up the merchandise. Also, remember, if you're following this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Social media helps, but not as much of word of mouth. But if you're a social media fellow, then go to our IVM podcast handle on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn and follow us there. Also, please do remember to check out all of our different YouTube channels. We have a ton of them now. You can go to ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, where we maintain a list of all of these channels. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors for this week: TransUnion Civil, Boat Lifestyle, Checkpoint Software, Small Case, and Intel vPro. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Do you wonder why China does the things that it does? Or want to know how we could improve online privacy? Or perhaps you're thinking about how we can kickstart India's economy. If you'd like to search for the answers to such questions, check out All Things Policy, a daily public policy podcast that covers everything from employment figures to aircraft carriers. Tune in from Monday to Friday for new episodes and fresh takes.